for this year, I chose a theme of going back to basics, and so I've been doing a sermon series on the Buddhist Eightfold Path and then on the Unitarian Universalist Seven Principles. We kind of go back and forth. We're on the fifth principle, which is that we agree together. The principles are not a creed. They're not a line we have to toe in order to be all right with God. They are just, to use a Quaker phrase, they are a sense of the group. So this is a sense of what we all agree. And the fifth one is that we agree to affirm, which means say yes to, and promote, which means push the idea of, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. This congregation is run with a mix of representative democracy, the board that y'all elect, that Nell talked about, and a good old-fashioned Vermont town meeting. Most congregations have one congregational meeting a year. This one has two. And we kind of have four because before each meeting, we have the pre-congregational meeting, which is for those of us who like to argue. In my family, it was a sport. I find it invigorating. Not everybody does, so that's what the pre-congregational meeting is for. In order to have democracy in a congregation work the best, people have to have a stake in it. They have to agree that this is a good way to run things. And they need to take steps in towards throwing in their lot with the church to join up and start ushering and get on a committee and get on the board and be the president of the board, and you don't have to go to seminary. And that's why Rabbi Jesus said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Because if you give enough money to the church so that you kind of feel it every month, then your interest in what's going on at the church wakes up a little bit more. And you go, hey, I have a right to my voice here. I have a right to hold my head high. I'm being generous within my means. It doesn't mean the people who give the most run things. It just means if you can hold your head up, then you're more likely to raise your voice. Okay, so people give their time or their treasure, their talent to the church, and they get invested. And democracy works best when we trust the process. I didn't say trust the government, I said trust the process, which the citizens are all part of it. And William Fulbright said, in a democracy, dissent is an act of faith. So dissent is very democratic. E.B. White said, he talked about trust, kind of. Democracy is the recurrent suspicion that more than half the people are right more than half the time. But it's sometimes hard to trust the process. William Churchill, I think you know, said famously, democracy is the worst form of government there ever was, except for all the others we've tried. So let's talk about churches first, and then we'll move to the country. In most groups, and I know most churches, I know the most about churches other than other groups, and so in most churches, there's a little element in everybody that's kind of grumbly, and it says, I don't feel I'm in control of this congregation. Who's running this place anyway? And some people go, I think the rich people always run the place. And other people go, I think the retired people always run the place. And mostly, in my experience, churches are run by people who have the time and the interest and the energy to run things, and the willingness. And also, people here, we're trying to get people to be able to help run things who have small children, and so we have childcare at everything that needs childcare. Okay, but people still have their suspicions, and some congregations are more suspicious than others. My friend Jim has a congregation where this little knot of people. You know the line where people say hello to the minister after the service. There was a little knot of about 5 people that came through the line and said, well, we finally had our suspicions confirmed. We know who's running this church now. And he was like, who? They said, we heard you talking. We heard about the core committee. And he was like, the core committee? He said, yeah, you were talking to Justine and Albert there behind the piano after the service last Sunday about the core committee. We heard you. He was racking his brain, and he was thinking, what was he talking to them about behind the... So there had been a dear, beloved member of the congregation who had given a piece of really ugly art to the church and demanded that it be hung behind the pulpit so everybody could enjoy it every Sunday. And some members had formed a Decor committee in hopes that they could prevent that from happening again. And we do pretty well with democracy in this congregation. We have our aspirations and we try to live up to them. We're all about right relationship. We have our healthy relations covenant. We have our mission. We're going at our vision of how things could be. We are trying always to expand our understanding of the word we and us so that there are fewer and fewer people we think of as you and them. So us gets bigger. This is how civilization gets built. This is a spiritual path. And we disagree with one another with respect and curiosity is what our healthy relations covenant says. We invite disagreement with respect and curiosity. And if you forget, you're having a bad day, your blood sugar is low or whatever, and you disagree rudely or sharply or without respect, you get a little letter from the president with a copy of the covenant attached saying, hello, remember this? Please remember. So we don't always get there, but we can see it from here. We have our vision. We have our mission. Okay. I wish I could kind of leave it there with the church, but I want to go on and talk about democracy in our country right now. I love democracy when the vote goes my way. And I start studying about what's wrong with democracy when the vote doesn't go my way. So, leaving aside the question of whether we can trust the people in power, and our whole system of democracy is set up on the assumption that you'd better not trust the people in power. See? Trusting the government is not necessarily patriotic. And my country, right or wrong, means you're acknowledging that sometimes your country's wrong. And about half of us think it's wrong in a given time. And people, I read emails that say, well, you know, you're not alone. You're in a room of 100 people, and 48 people voted the way you did, and 46 voted another way, and then there were the other people who messed everything up. Sorry, did I say that out loud? But no, we're in a room where only, 55 people voted of the 100. We're in a room where lots of people didn't even go vote, which doesn't make your heart sing about democracy. And the low turnout is one of the obstacles to democracy. But I've read about other obstacles. One is that we don't get a good civics education, most of us. Most of us don't really know how things work in the government. There's no shame in that. It's just we are not taught. And so this congregation is exploring, trying to figure out some kind of civics curriculum that we can teach one another and learn how it happens as part of our education as Unitarian Universalists. And if you're interested in working on that, please tell me. Another obstacle, I think, is that in 1987, under the Reagan administration, the Federal Communications Commission voted 4-0 to erase the Fairness Doctrine. Do you all remember, some of you are old enough to remember, when TV stations, radio stations, newspapers had to present both sides of the issue. They had to have the pro and they had to have the con. Well, in 87, the argument was there are so many news outlets now, there are so many internet channels and there's so many cable channels. Really, we don't only have 3 anymore. And so surely people can find a broad spectrum of news wherever they want it, and each individual channel doesn't have to present fair and balanced pro and con, otherwise get in trouble with the FCC. So that was 1987. 1988, Rush Limbaugh had his first show. And it went on from there. The liberals were a little bit slow on the uptake, and so they didn't get their station until, well, some years later. But now we have red stations and blue stations, and really you have to do it yourself. If you want to find both sides, you have to listen to both red and blue stations. And one of the problems with that is that not only do we not really trust the process, we don't trust our information anymore. There's so much misinformation out there, and it's hard to sometimes tell one from the other. In the last couple of years, it's gotten harder and harder, and so you have to go to red stations, listen to the red facts, and you go to blue stations, listen to blue facts. And it's no wonder that those of us who don't listen to the others very much think that those other people who voted the other way are somehow just wacky. How could they vote for Obama when the facts are that he's this and that is wrong with him? Or how could they vote, how we do? And we make up reasons why people voted whichever way. And part of it, though, is the red facts and the blue facts. Another obstacle is what we call gerrymandering, where, as they've started to say recently, the people don't choose their representatives, the representatives choose their voters. So you have districts that are drawn so crazily that you don't have to run for office by appealing to people on both sides. You only run for office by appealing to these people who are in your district, and you've drawn it very carefully so you don't ever have to talk to those other people. And so if for some wonderful reason we had districts where both liberals and conservatives lived, then our legislators would instantly be coming back toward the middle, because they would have to appeal to both. See what I'm saying? Another obstacle to democracy. Another one is money. Corporations have been people for 100 years. And one of the people coming out through the line in the first service, I love it because I learn in the line after the first service, said it was a kind of a clerical error on the header of one of the documents that made corporations people in early 19, anyway. I didn't get to talk to him long enough to find out what the actual year was. But Citizens United is a decision that made money equal speech. And so free speech meant as much money as you wanted to pour into lobbying or into making friends with politicians, into trying to get your own particular little guy, usually, elected. And so, it's 1886. I wrote it right here. 1886, Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific. That's when corporations became people. So until then, only people were protected by the Bill of Rights. And let me read the Bill of Rights part to you, which never would pass these days, but it's the 14th Amendment. It passed long ago when the country was more liberal. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Okay, Here's one of the problems with this, and I'm getting a lot of this thought from Tom Stites, who used to be editor of the UU World magazine, which name I love, by the way. I used to have a coworker when I wasn't working in a church, and he would just fall out every time I would call Boston and say, "This is Meg Barnhouse. Can you give me the world, please?" Connect me with the world, if you will. So what Tom Stites said from his research is that part of the problem is it's not that corporations are evil. It's that some corporations are so big that half of the world's largest economies are corporations, not countries. And so that is one problem. They have so much money. And the other thing is they don't die. People die. And you can't make trusts in perpetuity to keep your people who come after you as powerful and rich as you are. But a corporation just doesn't have to worry about that because they go on and on unless they go kaput. But they don't have to die if they're run right. And they don't have children. And a lot of us get our sense of how the world should be by thinking of the future for our children and our grandchildren. Corporations don't really have to do that if they're not inclined to. Also, a corporation doesn't always have a conscience. Some corporations do. And probably about 75% of human individuals do. But a lot of corporations don't necessarily have a conscience. They don't have a sense of a moral compass. They are there to make money for their stockholders or their owners, period. And so it's as if, as soon as money became speech, it's as if the citizens individually are competing in a shouting match with somebody who has infinite money, 1,000 lawyers, never dies, and no conscience. We're not going to win. So that's one of the reasons why we get together, why we do things together. Okay. One lawyer wrote this. Corporations have been enthroned, and an era of corruption in high places will follow. And the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working upon the prejudices of the people until all wealth is aggregated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed. You know who that was? Abraham Lincoln. So it has always been this way. It has always been this way. That big money seeks to perpetuate itself. Of course it does. But citizenship is strong. And the vote is strong. And most people's votes can't be bought. And so we still prevail now and then. And we go do practical things, like look at the Indivisible site, where many groups are listed. Indivisible is listened to nationwide now after they put their website up a month ago. It is a couple of Lloyd Doggett's staffers who are based in Austin. And now people all over the country are listening to them to find out how to lobby effectively. Those of us who didn't know. But mostly what I want to say to you is do not despair. Do not be faint of heart. Have courage. I want to close by reading you something that was written by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. She's a wonderful therapist, storyteller. She says, "My friends, do not lose heart. We were made for these times." If you want to find this again, just Google, "We were made for these times." You'll find this. "I've heard from so many recently who are deeply and properly bewildered. They're concerned about the state of affairs in our world now. Ours is a time of almost daily astonishment and often righteous rage over the latest degradation of what matters most to civilized visionary people. And you are right. in your assessments. I grew up on the Great Lakes, and I recognize a seaworthy vessel when I see it. Regarding your soul, there have never been more able soul vessels in the water than there are now. And they are fully provisioned and able to signal one another as never before in the history of humankind. Look out over the prow. There are millions of boats of righteous souls on the waters with you. Even though your veneers may shiver from every wave in this stormy roll, I assure you that the long timbers composing your prow and rudder come from a greater forest. That long-grained lumber is known to withstand storms, to hold together, to hold its own, and to advance regardless. She goes on to say that it is in times like these when people tend to just faint from distress and look at all the things that are wrong and all the things they can't fix and get really overwhelmed. She says, we are wasting our energy if we do that. We are wasting the wind without hoisting our sails. We're needed, that's all we know. And we will be guided by great souls who will hail us, love us, and guide us, and we'll know them when they appear. Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world all at once, but of stretching out to mend the part of the world that's within our reach. Any small, calm thing that one soul can do to help another soul, to assist some portion of this poor, suffering world, will help immediately. What is needed for dramatic change is an accumulation of these small, non-dramatic actions. One of the calming and powerful actions you can do, she says, is stand up and show your soul. Stand on the prow of your boat and let your soul shine. And this is a healing thing, and this will signal to other souls that it is safe for them to stand on the prow of their boat and shine, and it causes things to catch fire in a good way. Struggling souls can catch light from other souls who are fully lit and willing to show it. If you would help calm the tumult, this is one of the strongest things you can do. I tend to despair, she said, but I do not let it eat from my plate, and I do not keep a chair for it at my table. When a great ship is in harbor and moored, it is safe, there can be no doubt. But that is not what great ships are built for. There are practical things we can do. We can show up and march. That is one of the things to do. People say, oh, marching doesn't do any good. You have to do other stuff. Yes, it's a both and. It's not either or. You can march. There's a Martin Luther King march because this is Martin Luther King weekend. And if you're interested in going on that, there is a lady in purple named Emily at the table in the gallery, the far one on the left, who will sign you up to go to the march. There is a women's march in Austin and in Washington, D.C. You can go to that same table and sign up for the women's march. There is a training this afternoon for Sanctuary in the Streets, which is where we get trained to interrupt an ICE officer as he or she arrests someone who is an asylum seeker. We don't really know how to do it most effectively, but after this training, more of us will. There are practical things we do, and we do them together.